So let's talk about those Miller emails. These are the emails that leaked out recently that revealed that Stephen Miller, who is Trump's head advisor, is truly what we have been warning about for quite some time now, and that is that he is a racist, a true troll, actually, who uses very provocative ways of communication in order to incite people, in order to anger people, and all that stuff. He is a troll. He's a troublemaker. He is a professional troll, and he has trolled his way to the White House, and he continues to utilize his trolling methods. And there was one particular email that leaked out. There's, I think, around 900 emails or so got leaked out. But there was one particular email that Yahoo News did an article on recently, and basically, Stephen Miller, people say Stephen Miller, but it's PH, so I say Stephen Miller. It doesn't matter. Regardless, the guy is the guy's a piece of crap, regardless of how you pronounce his name. But Stephen Miller sent this email to a former Breitbart writer by the name of Katie McHugh, and the email had an article that came out from the Manhattan Institute. It was written by Jason L. Riley, who is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. And the Manhattan Institute is not a far left, cultural Marxist website. The Manhattan Institute is a conservative think tank. And in this article, it talks about how immigrants, regardless of which countries they come from, they are much less likely to commit crime than members of the native population. And if you look at all of the major studies on the link between immigration and crime, you'll be hard-pressed to find someone who will outright say that, yes, migrants bring tremendous amounts of crime, or immigrants in general bring immense amounts of crime. There are numerous major studies that have been conducted showing that the whole link between immigration and crime is really a propaganda scheme used to fearmonger and scare people into hating the Ausländer, hating the foreigner. And you see this method of propaganda being utilized all throughout the Western world right now in this moribund nationalist phenomena that we have been witnessing in the last few years. And so anyway, Miller sends this email to this Breitbart writer, and he says, look at this article written by this Jason Riley guy. It's just a lie. It's just a lie. And I think he wrote in the email something like, more lies about immigration. Or he said, the mythical connection between immigrants and crime. Or no, sorry, that's the name of the article written by Riley. But Miller said something to the likes of, this is just lies about immigration. He said more lies about New America. And Miller was trying to say, this article is garbage. We need to counteract these types of studies by posting more stories about an immigrant committing a crime or immigrants committing crimes. In other words, he said to this Breitbart writer, post more stories about crimes being done by an immigrant or immigrants. Some refugee raped a lady, this immigrant stole something, this murder was done by this immigrant or these immigrants or whatever. And he said, find more stories of like that. Find more stories of about immigrants committing crimes, or more instances of immigrants committing crimes, and then post these stories in order to push the narrative that immigrants are criminals and rapists and all these things. Now, of course, you can easily find stories of immigrants committing crimes, right? It's not that difficult because crimes make the news. I mean, you don't open up the newspaper and read a story about, or, you don't open up your iPhone because people don't really read newspapers nowadays, at least not as much. And, you don't open up the news and, see a story about, oh, look at these wonderful Guatemalans picking cabbages or picking strawberries or whatever. Like, you don't that doesn't make the news. What is going to make the news is, oh, look, this Guatemalan stole somebody's car or something like that. And so it's not that difficult to find such stories. And so if you read 5, 6, 7 stories that say, oh, this immigrant or this migrant committed a crime, it's very easy to get someone to develop hatred for migrants or immigrants and to believe in the typical right-wing propaganda against immigration. And people who get caught up into this mentality, they will ignore whatever major studies that have been done. They will ignore all of these statistics. And they'll say, oh no, I found this one story, or I found these 5 stories that show, immigrants doing bad things. But the reality is that there are millions and millions of immigrants living in the United States. There are millions of undocumented immigrants living in the United States, and just because you find a dozen or so stories, that's not a major study. That's not empirical. That's not a major study into anything. And I love it when they say, oh, we found these stories of these horrendous crimes committed by migrants or whatever, or immigrants. And then those same people will say something like, oh, there's 30 million illegals. And I'm not sure if that's even true, but they'll say there's 30 million illegals. But it's like, wait a second. So just to take your numbers, right, the Ann Coulter numbers, there are 30 million people, and you found a few stories. That's not empirical evidence that favors your position. But anyway, Miller told this lady to find more stories of immigrants committing crimes and publish them in order to counteract these studies. Now, what this shows and what this proves is what we have been saying at Shubot.com for years now, and that is that the U.S. government, other major Western governments, have a strong interest in promoting nationalism. And this has been going on for decades. This has been going on since the end of the Second World War in the Cold War era. There is a name for this operation. There's multiple names for it, but the most famous one is Gladio. Basically, NATO had a strong interest in promoting nationalism in Western Europe and also in Turkey. And the United States government also wanted to push for anti-communist, pro-American nationalism in its own country. That's what Operation Northwoods was about. Create terrorist attacks, false flag attacks, and make the American people think that they were done by the Cubans in order to get Americans to hate on Cuba because Cuba was communist. And you look at this whole scenario. This is a person, Mr. Miller, who was deep in the U.S. government. And here we see him involved in a media operation to promote anti-immigration scaremongering. Which means that a lot of this anti-immigration stuff comes from government. And when Trump started his rhetoric, there were politicians in European countries who began to copycat and to ape Trump. I remember years ago reading an article about the right-wing Nazi Greek party called the Golden Dawn, and there was a leading member of the Golden Dawn who said, "We want to follow Trump. Yeah, follow Trump, like Trump. Yes, he have right idea." I know that's Russian, it's not Greek, but I'm trying. It's similar. But my point is that these European nationalists were copying Trump, and they saw in Trump some kind of a model or some kind of a hope, basically a way to catalyst the nationalist sentiment as really a form of a ripple effect into Western Europe. And, I find it interesting that you can tell people these things, and they will say, oh, no, I don't believe in any of that stuff. Oh, no. These people, they're right. They have the right idea. And they will bash, let's say, just to give some examples here, you have the the left-wingers doing some very bad and evil things, right? We can all agree on that. And the conservatives will say, look at those evil liberals. Look at those evil left-wing Marxists. And I would say, I agree, left-wing Marxists, absolutely evil. But then you'll tell these very people, but look at what's going on in the Republican Party. Look at what's going on with all these nationalist entities in Western Europe. Very dangerous stuff. And they will say, oh, no, 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 no. Oh, no, no. That's not what's going on. Oh, absolutely not. And it's very interesting that they will blame or they will accuse the left wing of the very things that they do. So if the left wing comes along and says, we want freedom for all, but at the same time they want to censor Christians and promote anti-Christian ideas, and the right wing will say, wait a second, you aren't for individual liberty, you aren't for freedom and justice for all, because for one thing, you are Marxist, and Marxists have a very deep history in genocide. All right, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at the history of Marxists to see all of the horrific atrocities that Marxists have done, right? Be it in China, Cambodia, Vietnam, Russia, all that stuff. Poland, all that stuff. And the Marxists will say, oh no, you got the history wrong. And they'll either say that those communist genocides weren't as bad as, people make it out to be, or they'll say that wasn't real communism, or they'll say, well, it didn't really happen at all, right? And I've seen those types of extreme views. And that's the hypocrisy of the left, right? The left will say, oh, we believe in, for example, you'll have left-wingers say that they're anarchist. But then when you actually press on them what they really want, they're actually hardcore statists. I remember years ago meeting an anarchist from Mexico, and he said he was an anarchist. I'm an anarchist. And then I said, well, you hate government, right? Yes. And I said to him, do you support the Cristeros? Cristeros were Catholic rebels who fought against the anti-Christian government of Plutarco Elias Calles back in the 1930s. And he said, oh no, I don't support the Cristeros. The Cristeros were bad, they were terrorists. And I said, wait a second, but I thought you were anti-government, so wouldn't you be rooting for the Cristeros who also hated the government? And he said, no, 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 the Calles regime was correct in persecuting the Cristeros. So that just really proved that he himself was a statist. All these people believe in government. All these people believe in despotism and tyranny. They only disagree with the other side because, for one, it's not their team, and secondly, the other side doesn't promote the perception of government that they are promoting. But at the end of the day, both of these factions, all of these factions, would lead to the same thing, and that is bloodshed and misery for the innocent. The right wing have pretty much the same mentality. The right wing will say, oh no, these people aren't racist. Oh, these people aren't eugenists or pagans or anything like that. These are good patriots who are simply defending their countries. And then, they'll point the fingers at, for example, they'll say, well, look at what these evil liberals are doing in the Vatican. They're promoting this Pachamama worship. Pachamama, oh yes, evil Pachamama worship. And I agree, it's not good at all. But at the same time, these people, these conservatives, right-wingers, whatever they call themselves, they will then say, well, look at this wonderful Catholic Austrian guy who threw the Pachamama idols into the river. And you'll tell these people, wait a second, the guy who threw the Pachamama idol into the river is Alexander Schugel, and here's a video of him refusing to denounce the pagan nationalist organization of the Identitarians in Europe. And I was the one who asked him that question, me and my comrade Andrew. And he refused to denounce the pagan nationalists. So if this person really hated paganism, why couldn't he just give a simple denunciation of a pagan nationalist movement in his own country? See, people like to simply point fingers at the other side, but they don't like looking at the evils that their own group does. And one thing that I wish Americans would do is, Americans on the Republican side of things, that is, one thing I wish that they would do is look at the evils within their own movement. Yes, let's point at the evils of the left. Yes, let's expose the evils of the left. But at the same time, let's look at the evils that are happening within our own circles, because conservatives like to talk about the racism of the left, the racism of the Democrat Party. And I'm all for that. But at the same time, shouldn't you also be concerned that that very racism is in your own group. Anyway, just some of my thoughts. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.